Okay, this tool actually presenting itself in the form of a lost object, so to speak, okay, finds its whole meaning within a certain economy of needs. You feel this as a loss, you experience this as a loss simply because you feel you need it. You need to appropriate it. You need to have it, if you like. Okay. So, however, therefore, for Deleuze and Guattari, behind a certain theory of desire based upon lack, there stands that economy of needs, wants and needs. Okay. But you know, the idea that I see as something new in this work, which would spread itself and turn out to be a commonplace cliche of postmodern thinking, was this. It's an interesting idea indeed. Needs are something produced. Okay? Needs are something produced through social relations. Okay? So if you are talking about needs, for instance, in early modern thinking, like Karl Marx, okay, or others, needs are considered to be natural, you know. So when we are talking about the natural needs of the human beings, we can enumerate procreation, shelter, nourishment, so on and so forth, such things. Okay? You may add some other things as well, need to express oneself, etc., but they are not important. Whatever the actual needs are not important. Okay, the important thing is the difference between seeing needs as naturally given and as socially produced. Okay. As we will see, this will cause such a new interpretation of an economy of needs, will cause a modification in the good old Marxian distinction between use and exchange value as well, in case of Jean Baudrillard. Okay. A challenge will be produced by Jean Baudrillard against Marxist privilege attributed to use value to the disadvantage of the exchange value, for instance. And such a notion of use value, Baudrillard would argue, is based upon a conceptualization of needs as if they are naturally given. Okay. Now here again we see a similar argument in the critique of Deleuze and Guattari directed against the conceptualization of desire based upon lack. Okay. So, if desire is not based upon lack, then what it is, and more important than that perhaps, how it functions turns out to be the basic theme actually of this work. Okay. Now I'm going to read you the beginning section of the assigned text, the first chapter of the book Anti-Oedipus, titled The Desiring Machines. Okay, so just to be able to give you some idea about the tone of the book, as well as how desire, notion of a certain new definition, understanding of desire, occupies the center place in their analysis. Okay. Now I'm reading. It's at work everywhere, functioning smoothly at times, at other times in fits and starts. It breathes, it heats, it eats, it shits and fucks. What a mistake to have ever said the id. Everywhere it is machines, real ones, not figurative ones. Machines driving other machines, machines being driven by other machines, with all the necessary couplings and connections. An organ machine is plugged into an energy source machine. The one produces a flow that the other interrupts. The breast is a machine that produces milk, and the mouth a machine coupled to it. The mouth of the anorexic wavers between several functions. Its possessor is uncertain as to whether it's an eating machine, an anal machine, a talking machine, or a breathing machine. Hence, we are all handymen, each with his little machines. For every organ machine, an energy machine. All the time flows and interrupts. Judge Schreber has sunbeams in his ass, a solar anus, and rest assured that it works. Judge Schreber feels something, produces something, and is capable of explaining the process theoretically. Something is produced. The effects of a machine, not metaphors. Okay? Now, this is the end of the quotation I would like to share with you. Now, it's everywhere. It does everything. Okay? What we are talking about is desire. Okay? Furthermore, actually, just to be able to give you a rather single definition, we can think of their conception of desire as that libidinal energy, not necessarily sexual, or sexual should not be understood in its narrower sense, okay? That libidinal energy which flows as a result of excess, okay? This is all. Now, this definition, as you can see, has nothing to connect, to do in connection with establishing a bond between desire and any subject whatsoever. Okay, what we are talking about, and this is the difficulty of talking about desire, what we are talking about, that desire predates, if you like, any possible formation of subjectivity. It is prior to the constitution of the subject. Therefore, the difficulty, okay? We usually tend to understand desire when it is attributed to a certain subject. Therefore, we tend to think desire as in connection with the subject in terms of a lack, for instance. The subject's felt lack about its own loss of totality, wholeness. Okay. However, the starting point for such a discussion of desire, as has been exemplified in Deleuze and Guattari, cannot take its reference point to any forming or already formed subject. Okay, so it starts out of nowhere, if you like. Okay, as an excess. Excess of what? As an excess of action and affects. These terms are interesting and a very long history, as a couple I mean, okay? This couple had been established by Aristotle in his discussion of the process of, so to speak, coming to being and passing away, which can be understood in this context as a process of becoming rather than being, okay? Now, Deleuze and Guattari, in their effort to base or to develop a certain conception of desire within the framework of a thinking which tries to base itself in a conceptualization of becoming rather than being. Okay? So in contradistinction to this, which means that everything has to be conceived in terms of flux, okay? Nothing can be conceptualized or petrified in terms of a complete object, but everything, while at the same time coming into being, is passing away also, okay? So, if we attribute this within the context of the possibility of the creation on action and effect, okay, you will see that desire is nothing else than the excess of this. This, the first peculiarity that they understand in their conceptualization of desire. Desire or desiring machines simply because desire always presents itself in the form of machines operating in a binary modality, okay? By binary modality, we mean it connects with something else here and with another something else there, okay? Establishing a connection and therefore, in their language, a certain system of alliances. And this certain system of alliances enabling the passage of the flows. Now the question is, what are these flows and through which or what they pass? Okay. Now, to be able to see this, one has to understand the meaning of excess in connection with their conceptualization, production of production. Practically speaking, production of production does not mean much, you know. It simply means the continuous possibility of acting and being affected. Okay, that's all. So actually, this is an interesting couple, simply because, as we will see, and Özcan repeats the pattern, it has been described as the very possibility of matter in Aristotle. Okay? So therefore, their materialism tends to be an Aristotelian sort of materialism, so to speak, rather than classical Marxist or Feuerbachian sort of, or atomic sort of materialism. Okay? So we are talking about, when we are talking about desire and operations, desiring machines, etc., we are talking about material existences, materiality in the fullest possible sense of the term, but understood as the very possibility of action and affection. Okay? So that matter in that context should not be understood as if some given substance. Okay? It is not a given substance. It is something produced, and within the concept of production, what is hidden is the very possibility of the action and affection, which themselves in their interaction produces. Okay? So production of production then refers to this possibility, the prevalence of this possibility, the permanence of this possibility. Okay? So in this, what comes materialized is the desiring, what they call desiring machines. Okay. They are not analogies, they insist, okay? They are real machines interrupting and allowing the flows to pass, while at the same time producing the flows. According to their understanding, one desiring machine, while standing as the source of flows in relation to another, in relation to yet another, it presents itself as the interrupting machine of the flows. Examples, for instance, they were already talking about that breast over there, out of which there comes the flow of the milk, right? Breast of the mother here, and the flow of milk there. Okay? And here what we have is the mouth of the baby. Okay? Is the mouth of the baby. What flows here between that breast and that mouth is the milk. From the point of view of the mouth of baby, okay, the desiring machine here, which is called breast, okay, milk supplying breast, seems to be the source of that flow of milk, okay, an uninterrupted flow of milk. Why the gasps and other monthly gestures of the baby interrupting that flow, okay? His sucking movements, for instance, interrupting that flow, okay? So in relation to that breast, which appears as the supplier of that uninterrupted flow, from the point of view of the mouth, okay, turns out to be the reverse, okay. Now this supplying that uninterrupted flow and that interrupting that flow, okay, cutting that flow, slicing it into interruptions, into intervals, therefore establishing a certain control. However, in relation to, for instance, the digestive machine here, it appears in its own time then as the supplier of the milk. So, okay. So what is flowing here is something produced by the operation of the desiring machines themselves, okay, passing through a certain path and arriving at another desiring machine through certain processes of continuity and interruptions, okay. Actually, for Deleuze and Guattari, it is this flow coming out of the excess of production, okay, excess of production, which produces its own term, those desiring machines as well. Or the operation of the desiring machines, on the other hand, producing those flows. Okay. Now, this part of the argument seems quite difficult to understand simply because what we are talking about is a preconscious stage, is about a preconscious stage, okay? So, actually, we are talking about the formation of the body as well as the very formation, very ground of the unconscious. Their critique of psychoanalysis, classical psychoanalysis, contains that so far within the frame of psychoanalysis, the unconscious either understood as a subsection, remember the Freudian early topographic stage, as a subsection of the consciousness, okay? A certain section of the consciousness laying behind or out of the reach of its immediate awareness. Or later on, for instance, when a certain another space had been reserved for the unconscious, it has been still posited in its relationship and through that relationship as something unconscious. Okay. So one symptom of this shows itself in the analysis of the unconscious in psychoanalytic procedure, according to them. And this is that. Remember, Freud himself has said that unconscious as such can never be known. All we know about unconscious is through the symptoms which show themselves in consciousness, which means that all psychoanalysis is concentrating its efforts upon is nothing else than the conscious representations of the unconscious, okay? Therefore, according to DNG, psychoanalysis is not able to penetrate the real unconscious processes, okay? Simply because what it is dealing with is nothing else than the writing of the unconscious in the language of the conscious, okay? So they claim that their materialist psychoanalysis, if you like, okay, would be capable of delving into these unconscious processes. And therefore, this part of the argument turns out to be quite difficult to understand. Okay. What we are talking about is the very constitution of the entity, even prior to any possible distinction between conscious and unconscious, okay? Therefore, remaining prior to that distinction, and most appropriate term to refer to it would be unconscious processes. Processes having nothing to do with the problem of the consciousness, okay? So the very constitution of the body, and together with the body, not anywhere else, together with the body, the constitution of the unconscious. Okay. So this excess of production, actually they exemplify this with the activities of the schizophrenic. Okay. How the schizophrenic treats the objects in the world turns out to be an example for them, showing the possibility of this excess. Okay, you know, in usually normal production, what we do, is to devise a certain object to be produced and then arrange our activities accordingly and finally produce that object and then stop our activity of production, at least with regard to that object. Okay. For instance, if we are carpenting a table, okay, we may have a certain this or that idea of table. It's not important. We arrange our activities accordingly, and when we are satisfied with the produced tableness of the table, okay, we stop. We are doing no more on it, okay. But their example shows or tells us that, I don't know how common this example among the schizophrenics, but they are capable of supplying a couple of examples with that regard, show us that this schizophrenic practice of producing does not stop there. It does not stop anywhere, actually. It continues and continues, going on and going on up to a certain point where it is no longer possible to identify the object with anything else. Okay? So this is what we are talking about, the excess in production. Okay? And desire understood in terms of this excess of production. Okay? It goes over and beyond the limits of any functionality, any intelligibility of the object has to offer whatsoever. Okay. It's in that sense we are talking excess. So the object, up to the point of objects losing its determined character. Okay. So that the table turns out to be no longer recognizable as a table. Okay. So out of this excess, this loss of the meaningful object, so to speak, what desiring production or operation of desiring machines produces is nothing else than passing to another stage in their operation or process of production, what they call body without organs, usually written like this. Okay. Now the problem, as you have seen, with body without organs is this. Okay. Body without organs is not a functioning body. Or if you like, is not a living body. Or if you like, it's a dead body. And actually, this body without organs can be identified as the primal form of the infant at one certain level of analysis. At other levels, you can associate with the rigid socius of the society. Well, we're going to come to this, okay? For the time being, let's assume that what has been produced through this excess of production is something which is not recognizable. Something, however, which is there at the same time, but having no connection whatsoever with other things, okay? Therefore, if the first stage of the operation of desiring machines, or stage, that you should not understand these stages. These are all intermingled processes, actually, analytically separated from each other. As the production of production, the second one, culminating in the production of the body without organs, is the production of recording. Why? Simply because recording is the result of the interaction between this body without organs and others surrounding, about to be organ machines, desiring machines. Okay? You know, there are fluxes everywhere. Remember the quotation that I read to you, okay? There are machines everywhere, operating in every direction, okay? So there is no vacuum in this space. And this space is not a geographical space, though. This space is the space of relationalities. Everything being connected with everything, and everything allowing or interrupting the passage of the flows. Okay? So this is, within this kind of imagery, something which is not capable of connecting which is not capable of assuming any functionality, comes into, if you like, being. Okay? Body without organs is over there as something produced as a result of that production activity. Okay? And it is entering into relations, a process which involves certain difficulties, and we are going to take a little look at it, okay? Entering into relations with the surrounding desiring machines and flows, okay, produces that recording, if you like. By recording, we simply the engraving all those forces, flows, and desiring machines on the surface of that immutable, static body without organs. Okay? So they touch upon it, they operate around it, they try to pass on it, through it, etc., and leave traces on it. Okay? And these traces have been a process of recording at the same time, constituting a continuous and ever-flowing system of signifiers. Remember the reason now at that stage we won't call them as signs any longer as structuralism would do. As structuralism, when calling them as signs, establishing a strong relationship between the signifier and the signified, remember. But here, what's at stake, and remember Lacanian argument, what's at stake is the proliferation of not signs but signifiers, which themselves are not able to signify, okay, but constitute a chain of signifiers. At that point, Deleuze and Guattari begin to differ from the Lacanian psychoanalytic interpretation of the action of the signs by saying that, but they are not fantastic. Okay? What they produce may not be meaning appropriate to their signifieds. The chain of signs, however, produces the reality through and through. Okay. That's one of the critical differences between the Lacanian psychoanalysis and the approach tried to be developed by Deleuze and Guattari here in this book. We will see its importance later on. Okay. Actually, it culminates in saying that whatever the states of the lived experience could be, okay, a lived experience remains as a lived experience, and in this quality, it is real. Okay. So, we will see other important consequences of this approach as well later on. Okay, so then, what's at stake with the body without organs entering into the picture is the production of a recording. Okay. So processes had been recorded in a rather representational fashion, but strangely enough, according to the organization, unformed organization of, undetermined organization of body without organs. Okay. Not as themselves, but these signifiers, therefore, would acquire the states of their reality. Third, the third production concerns the production of consumption. To which they connect a specific concept of consummation. Consummation as a term, as you may mean, may mean the culmination of something to its perfection or its fulfillment. Okay? But here in this context, Deleuze and Guattari specifically associate, out of this fulfillment connection, associate the term with pleasure. Okay? Now, what has been produced in the production of consumption is nothing else than that subject, which turns out to be a nomadic one, floating over the surface of the body without organs, alongside the chain of signifiers. Okay. Generated out of the pleasure as a residuum of the pain of the process or production of recording. Okay, so production of recording is something painful. Okay, actually, when we open up this process, we will find out that first of all, recording is on the surface of the body without organs. Okay, that body which has not acquired a specific form yet. Okay. Now, here, the first reaction of the body without organs towards the forces operating, surrounding it, okay, all those operations of the desiring machines and flows, okay, is repulsion. Actually, in psychoanalytic terms, corresponding to primary repression. Okay. So the model is still there. They are making modifications, important modifications in the model. Marxist model is there, psychoanalytic model is there, but they are putting them together in a quite untraditional way, let me say this. Okay. So repulsion, this means that, for instance, think about your own selves, okay? You are sitting here, over there, in your own inner tranquility, and some external effect comes and disturbs your tranquil state, okay? Remember the case in Hegelian argumentation as well, okay? That consciousness assuming itself as the totality of existence, now confronting with the another consciousness, which proves itself worthy to be called consciousness by its capacity to reject, to be reduced to the states of an object. Remember, okay? It was that experience that was something disturbing, agonistic, okay? I was the whole. And now somebody else appearing in the horizon and destroying the totality, okay? Now, this very somebody is outside of that destroyed totality. That totality, which is now me, out of this process turning into what Hegel called self-consciousness, Selbstbewusstsein. A similar process here at stake, okay? So at the first stage of this formation, body without organs reacts in a rather repulsive way against the surrounding operations of desiring machines and flows. Okay. So what this produces is, according to Deleuze and Guattari, is the paranoiac machine. Actually, corresponding in his later analysis of the social machines, corresponding to the despotic machine, so to speak. Okay. However, later on, it changes its attitude and begins to attract those operations and flows of the desiring machines. Okay. Generating, so to speak, or forming itself as a miraculating machine. This miraculating is an interesting term, simply because in connection with, actually, let me put it this as well, in connection with a nomen. This is an interesting term, so I'm giving it to you. Okay. Now it attracts the surrounding operations of the desiring machines and flows, etc., onto itself. Okay. And in this attraction, actually, it generates the miraculation of those machines which approach to itself. Okay. Now, what is this miraculation and what this concept nomen here implies? It's a Latin term, actually, etymologically speaking, originating from the transformation of the Greek nous. Okay. Which is usually translated as thinking or thought. Okay. Well, it appears that, especially in later Greek thinking, it acquires a certain character of divine, okay, and usually interpreted and used within the Latin context as to refer to the divine power of the deity, God, but not to be confused with God itself, okay, but it's divine power. Is there a Turkish relevant term to this term? Is there anybody who knows it? Herhalde İslam'da da vardır böyle bir terim. Expressing divine power. Nur mesela böyle bir şey mi? I don't know. Okay, whatever. It appears that in many cultures there is such a concept, actually roughly corresponding to, in Polynesian culture, for instance, the concept of mana as well. But mana, as in that case as well, should not be confused with the person of the deity. Okay? It emanates from the deity, it surrounds all being, it in a way miraculates everything as the creatures of God. Okay? So it is in that sense, here they call this machine the attracting machine, actually, miraculating machine. Every machine approaching to it, acquiring a certain mana, if you like. Okay. We will see this, for instance, in the cases of the difference between the individuals, those who reject to abide by the social rule, and those who are readily accept to abide by it. Okay, for instance, being an ordinary citizen, decent citizen, okay, implies that that individual had been miraculated by the social system. Okay. In other words, seen, accepted, and interpreted as a brilliant individual, a good individual. Okay, so the mana of the social organization passing through the individual who abides by it, okay, who is produced by it and abides by it, and in a way consecrates that individual. Okay, it implies here, it is the miraculating term, miraculating here used in this sense. Okay, shall we?